Yeah.
Um,
I know it looks like you have a lot.
I do have a couple. But I was interested, you know, nothing has changed apparently with the control at the Rafah crossing, I guess it is. With the Egyptian revolution, nothing, do you see any prospect? I mean, what's happening?
I mean, so basically, the history of Rafah crossing, briefly, is that it was prior to about 97, Palestinian residents of Gaza could use either the border crossing going from Jordan into Israel and the West Bank, known as the Allenby Bridge, or Rafah crossing. After 97, we were only allowed to use Rafah crossing. From about 97 to 2005, the disengagement, it was exclusively controlled and manned by the Israelis. So Israeli soldiers were physically present, you know, again, deciding how many hours to open it, when they would shut it down, and so on and so forth. Then that changed. After the disengagement, there was this, you know, gradually over time, we saw sort of the disappearance of the physical presence of the occupation, and it kind of became what we call this invisible hand controlling Gaza. So we wouldn't physically see the soldiers, whether at checkpoints, we would just, you know, our interaction with them was through, you know, drones or F-16s or helicopter gunships and so on and so forth. After the disengagement, there was a period of 3 months where the border was completely closed as they were figuring out, you know, what was going to happen. Palestinians obviously were demanding a return to them, to their sovereignty. The Israelis were not agreeing, so the U.S., led by Condoleezza Rice, brokered this agreement known as the AMA, the Access and Movement Agreement. That it's, you know, it's quite obviously ironic at this point when you look back at it, because the choice of words was like, this is intended to give Palestinians control and freedom of movement, you know, things that they, you know, a vital economy depends on, all this kind of business. You know, which we all know was, you know, many Palestinian analysts were saying we need freedom of movement for people and goods in order for there to be a vital economy. After disengagement, that didn't happen. So they brokered this agreement, and it was supposed to be for 1 year. And what it said was that there would be these European monitors that were manning the crossing, but they would do so under the order of Israelis, and they would be based about, the Israelis would be based about 1 kilometer away, and they would tell their monitors when to go or when not to go. And there was a live video stream that the Israelis would be getting a list of passengers, and it was the same thing, only Palestinians with those Israeli ID cards could use the crossing. Well, it turned out disastrous because, again, no other Palestinians could enter, same thing. But it was worse because the Europeans were always fleeing the crossing at any sign of trouble. At any time the Israelis ordered them not to order the crossing, open it, they wouldn't, you know, listen to them. And so it was closed more than it was open, like more than, you know, 40% of the time. And so that didn't do anything, let alone, you know, nobody was faithful to the Israelis were not faithful to the agreement. After a year, you know, it continued to go on this way. When Palestinians said, look, it's expired, it said that we should now get sovereignty. So that's what was going on until June 2007, with when Hamas countered the coup by Fatah, and Fatah was evicted from Gaza to the West Bank, and Hamas gained control over Gaza. After that point, the monitors left permanently, and then for about 3 years, the crossing was just essentially closed, except for very brief periods when people felt the crossing or whatever. And the Egyptians and the quartet, everybody was insisting the only way we'll ever open it is if you Palestinians agree to return to this agreement. And Palestinians refused. Probably one of the good things that, you know, I mean, they insisted that we will not, because honestly, if we had returned to that, it would have been far worse than the situation that we see today. Eventually, in 2010, after the flotilla, the attack on the flotilla, this flotilla of humanitarian activists that were attempting to break the naval blockade on Gaza, were attacked by Israeli naval commandos, and 9 of them were killed. After that point, the Egyptian government eased up a little bit and finally reopened the crossing. But again, only for Palestinian residents. They no longer applied the AMA agreement, and after the revolution, people were very hopeful that the crossing would not only be opened regularly, but that this Israeli conditions that govern the crossing, that the Egyptians apply, would no longer apply, meaning that any Palestinian, or anyone in fact, could visit Gaza. That's really what we were hopeful. We had heard, you know, rumors about that and got very excited in the days after the revolution. That didn't happen. Now, on the plus side, the crossing is no longer closed indefinitely like it once was for days and weeks at a time. It's open more regularly. Now, young people, especially younger men and students, have still a hard time leaving or entering Gaza. The Egyptians still give them a hard time, and very significantly, it's still, again, these same Israeli rules and regulation that the Egyptians have adopted and are, inclusion with Israel rather, have not let go of. So that's really what's of concern to Palestinians. We still don't have a say or sovereignty over who can use that crossing. Families, are torn apart and divided because of it, and so on. Will that change after the elections? Remains to be seen. People kind of are looking with a careful eye to see who might be elected president, and there's talk about changing that, and Egyptians are very cognizant of that situation. So who knows? I mean.
So it's basically the same.
Yeah, it's kind of a return to square one, but it's it's better than it was in the last 10 years in the sense that it's not closed indefinitely. But it's a return to square one in the sense that it's the same principles that apply. Limited people can use the crossing.
And an international, someone from the United States can't just show up and...
Right, that's really the biggest problem. Any non-Gaza resident, be they Palestinian or foreigner, can't, that was the hope, is that there would be a formal system where somebody could apply for a visa and enter. That hasn't happened.
We did get it in 2009, I was with George Galloway.
Right, I was going to say, if you go with...
international.
Right, like a convoy, and you apply ahead of time. It's easier now for internationals to get in than it once was. Even as individuals, you can go and apply. I don't know what the system is through the Ministry of Information or Foreign Ministry in Cairo. Particularly for journalists. But I don't know as an individual. Usually now what they do is you go right to the border and you go through the tunnels. So there's this whole other system that has developed, and it's funny because at a time in 2007. I filmed a short documentary about the tunnels, and it was very much an underground economy. It was really hard to get people to speak about it. It's very dangerous. Mainly, a lot of it was contraband. After the blockade sort of came full circle, that changed. It became an above-ground economy, significant part of the economy, a multi-million-dollar industry, and it's completely legitimate. It's taxed and regulated, and it includes people. So there's entire tunnels that are very wide. So once you go into the ground, the tunnel widens and is supported by platforms, and you can actually walk through there. And there's a couple of tunnels that are dedicated for the transport of people who lack ID cards, like spouses, or people who just want to visit. Several people, you just go up to the border, and if Egyptians are not allowing you through, there's always someone standing by that says tunnels, and it's $50 or something, and they take you through. And it's understood by both sides. Neither government says anything about it. So, he's yeah. But, both the Egyptians and the Hamas government kind of, turn a blind eye to this. They know that it's happening. Nobody really cares. So there's more avenues to get in, but there's certainly no formal routes, because getting in as an individual through areas is impossible unless you do it through an NGO. Getting in through Egypt is still hard, but easier, unless you do it, through a convoy. So, I don't know. It's a little better. It's certainly better than it was 5 years ago, but, Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is an impossible to answer question, but I kind of piggybacking on what he was saying, I wonder how you see the Arab Spring affecting the plight of the Palestinians, especially in Gaza.
Yeah, definitely. I've answered that a little. I think the biggest change probably is a lot of the traditional powers or the centers of power are changing, away from Egypt, more towards Turkey. We saw that happening over the course of the past few years, Turkey exerting more influence. Also, the hope is that once a lot of these puppet regimes are no more, even though the process itself takes a very long time, the process of change, that we won't, because a lot of time, for a lot of the past decade, the problem was we had these regimes, these very repressive regimes in their own right, colluding for their own reasons with, Israel, with the United States, with the Quartet. The first countries to agree to enforce the blockade after the elections, the Arab League, it was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and then the Arab League voted on it, because the results of that democratic election, the first democratic election in the Arab Middle East, was not a good precedent for them to set, and they didn't want that. So that worked very well for the United States as well. And so that's always been a problem, is that we've never had, you know, honest allies. Everyone has kind of been using the Palestinians for their own purposes. So once you kind of break that, I think you can begin to, you know, see more pressure being exerted on Israel if there are more, you know, honest governments and not kind of people doing things for their own purposes. So I think it, you know, will change for the better. And we saw that immediately after the Arab Spring took place, you know, immediately. What was it that had happened? With the prisoner exchange was a big, I mean, it probably would not have happened if it was before the Arab Spring, I don't think. But there was a lot of, you know, other examples that you could cite.